We have an executive JD program. We have a part-time weekends, a hybrid program, and then full-time program. So we have a few different options. So it all varies on whatever hours you work.
Yeah, we got to pick one elective we got like 4 choices. I picked international law, but your second semester you get to pick one.
We're going to take a quick break and then we'll come back, talk about current events.
Quickly, before we start, I just want to give a plug to our social media accounts. You can follow Cold Call Lawcast on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter as well. So on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, Cold Call Lawcast. You can follow us.
So let's talk about the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. He was chosen to replace Kennedy, who's, I think he's like 82 now, so I think he was getting, I think reports were saying that he wanted to spend time with his alien.
Yeah, whatever. He's getting a big payoff to fucking leave so that Trump can appoint another one of his, like, little babies.
Yeah, that might be it as well. But yeah, Brett Kavanaugh, he's actually a pretty political figure for I think for many Supreme Court people. He worked on the recount. I think he even brought the case to the Supreme Court, the Gore v. Bush.
Helped impeach Clinton.
Yeah, I think he did that as well. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of judges usually try and that they bring in are usually more apolitical. Obviously, they have a political leaning based on the judgments that they have out there. But I think he's kind of more political than I think anybody I guess I've ever seen come through.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all political, but I think, yeah, he's 100%. I mean, they want to take down Roe v. Wade eventually. I think that's one of the ultimate goals, but
yeah, and
he's gonna do it. And little fresh-faced Brett,
little
gumdrop boy.
Scene. The Supreme Court.
He was actual like high school classmates with Gorsuch. They both clerked for Kennedy. It's like, a lot of diversity. Actually, diversity is big now. That's what we're doing with our Supreme Court. Is we're going for diversity with these white men in their 50s.
It's kind of shocking that Trump can't find anybody who's not a white male to be on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, here he was like, "Ooh, I've picked out some women for my short list. Isn't that awesome?"
Well, who gave him the list? It was all curated by one of the conservative societies, the Federalist Society. Yeah, so. And it's also got like, I think ties to like the, Catholic Church. Like there's
Koch brothers. Yeah.
I mean, it's all engineered.
It's good.
Yeah. Kavanaugh, he's cute though. I mean, no, not like. I mean, cute like, in a diminutive, insulting way.
He's
he looks like
Ted
normal Cruz's brother. That's from like just a slightly different alien tribe.
The real Zodiac killer.
Yeah. I mean,
they're actually the same person.
Yeah,
they're the same person. Just
oh my god,
they might be. We're looking at pictures of Brett Kavanaugh. He does look a lot like Ted Cruz.
Oh god,
I don't know. I'm looking at him upside down.
As you can tell, Hannah's very thrilled by this.
Yeah. Oh man, that's not a smile.
Looks exactly the same in all his pictures, which is kind of neat.
Ageless,
timeless.
Yeah, it's all the baby's blood that he drinks.
Yeah.
He's got a little bit of hair in some of these older ones. Either way, no matter. I mean, it's funny that they found someone who like so looks the part, but
a white male.
He looks like, at least in our stereotypes, like version of America right now. Like he has the goals that he has. They're not trying to cover anything up with the current administration. Really, it's all just like. Every trick they try to pull is, the real trick of it is just that there is no trick. Like, the trick is hiding things in plain sight.
I mean, I don't think it's going to be, that this is really a huge change for the Supreme Court as much as people think it's going to be, just because Kennedy was a very conservative judge, which makes me kind of wonder why people keep saying that this is going to shift the balance so differently, because Kennedy was a fairly conservative judge. So I'm obviously the Gorsuch one obviously made a huge change, because we could have had a kind of a fairly liberal court to now being a fairly conservative court, and so I think that seems to be the biggest change. Do you guys think there is going to be a huge change in the way the Supreme Court would rule now?
I think it could. It could make definitely small difference. I mean, unfortunately, Kennedy was somehow the moderate. He was, in my view, extremely conservative, just like most of them are. And we were screwed either way. Like, I mean, we, being like the leftists, we were screwed.
Our political agenda is not known now. I mean, here it is.
Yeah, we were screwed. No matter who Trump picked, and whether or not Kennedy, lived on on the court, but he's even more conservative, and he's even more driven by a political agenda. And chances of, you think Ginsburg is going to make it through the term? We'll see.
I mean, that's the real one where it would really change the dynamics of the court, where if Ginsburg were to unfortunately pass away, I mean, then Trump gets another pick that would obviously be much more conservative than she would be.
Yeah, but I mean, Gorsuch replaced Scalia, so you weren't really, you were trading like for like there.
Right, but I think the big change wasn't the Gorsuch for Scalia, where they were basically the same person. I think it was the difference between him and Obama's choice, who was much more moderate, maybe a little bit left-leaning, maybe a little conservative for people who are fairly liberal.
Oh, you mean Garland?
Yes, Garland. So I think that was where there could have been a huge change, but it seems like these two picks that Trump has had really isn't going to do a huge shift, but perhaps maybe the biggest one might be on women's rights, or reproductive rights, I guess I should say.
Formerly known as women's rights. Say goodbye to them now. Abolish the Supreme Court.
Such a defeatist, Hannah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, learn how to do abortions in your garage, because, just in case.
I mean, women have been getting by doing that for a long time. But it would be really nice if we did not have to.
It's true. So. Cider House rules, we're going back there.
Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty messed up that, his view of executive power that I've heard and read a little bit about is just
the new one or
presidents
the old one
should be able to do anything, which is weird to me, because the judicial branch is a whole different branch that's supposed to exist to balance it in an ideal world, but yet they're picking it specifically not to be a separate thing, pretty much.
I mean, that's the whole foundation of the court systems. I mean, executive powers, and you will learn this in your constitutional law. I mean, there are enumerated powers that the president has, but they're very limited in a lot of ways. So, from what what Brett Kavanaugh is going to be doing here is he's going to be kind of shaking the foundations a little bit of how we go forward, and maybe on our executive powers, which I think is concerning a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So that's something we need to watch out for.
I think in terms of the executive powers, it's actually Rand Paul who's a libertarian senator. I believe he's from, I think it's Kentucky.
Yeah.
Right? And
wait, how's he doing? Is he recovered yet? But he got the shit beat out of him by his neighbor? That was awesome.
I think, so for Rand Paul, they're thinking he might not, he's kind of questioning. I kind of wonder how much he's really thinking about that, but he's saying he might not vote for Kavanaugh based on what you're saying, because with the libertarian principles are limiting the executive branch to what they can do.
Right. I think that's someone that we need to definitely keep an eye on, because I mean, women's rights, we've come a long way, and it's really hard to backtrack. And you've already seen with this administration a lot of backtracking, and I think that's really upset a lot of the population, and to no one's benefit. I feel like, I mean, it's really about what people think is right versus actually helping people, and with what we've all discussed as our interests, helping people is what really is driving the legal force in today's. I've seen more people applying to law school based on this political climate because they want to make a change, and I think that kind of spark an interest from this presidency is probably the silver lining in him being elected in the first place. So having all these different picks has really has gained momentum in the youth and getting them more interested in law. So there are some, I guess, positives in all of this.
Backlash. Yeah.
Yeah, backlash.
Yeah. He hates regulation unless it's your, uterus.
And so, I definitely think it's probably very true what you said, Anthony, on immigration law. I think probably since the whole immigration thing kind of blew up in their face, that there's been a lot of backlash to what they do. So I would think there's probably going to be a lot more immigration attorneys that are going to be starting to be turned out at law schools.
I agree.
So there were two things that came out this last couple weeks in terms of economics. One of the things was that, obviously the Trump's tax cuts, the Republican tax cuts, went into effect at the beginning of this year. And so that's where some people saw some savings, especially near the higher end of the income scale, in terms of savings in your pay due to reduced taxes. But what they've found out, and this was from Bloomberg, so not a left-leaning Democratic, newspaper, was saying that tax cuts has not done anything for workers, and they cite that there's actually been negative wage growth recently.
Imagine
that. Net wage growth.
Imagine
we know where Hannah stands on this. So that was one point that came out these last couple weeks was that wage growth still continues to lag, and it's been doing that for many years. But then there was also a second data point that came out that GDP growth for the second quarter of this year was 4.1%. So we saw a good data point in terms of quarterly GDP numbers for the Trump presidency, and he kind of took a victory lap. So I guess
he doesn't do laps. He does victory.
So I'm sure he's on his golf cart, probably making a lap around.
I don't think
right?
they let him drive that anymore.
Oh, I wouldn't.
I don't think they let him drive anything because his brain is malfunctioning.
But how do you really feel about Trump, though?
I mean that.
So I mean, is there?
I'm going to draw a picture for you.
So does anybody have any comments based on those two kind of data points that we're seeing in the economy?
Well, I don't know a whole lot about economics. I do think this tax law is probably not going to do much, especially since what I know about companies is that they essentially exist if they have shareholders to provide like their profits for shareholders, not the other way around. Like I feel like any trickle down is secondary for sure, at least. But also, I do want to point out that this is in the opinion section of Bloomberg. It's by Noah Smith, so it is like a different. It's not necessarily like the reporters, but the logic in this article does seem very sound. I think it's pretty
right. I mean, and it was a pretty well cited piece that he did, and he's I don't think from what I've seen of him he's not a super conservative. I mean, he took a fairly moderated turn, saying, well, maybe in the long run these tax cuts will be good if we just leave them some more time, and so I guess that's a potential argument. But I think especially the tax cuts for the corporations. So speaking as a person from business, from corporate, I have almost a decade of corporate finance experience. Businesses aren't just going to give you money for not really doing anything. Like just because they have more after tax income that doesn't mean, oh, well, we should take that and give it to the people that work for us, because they pay people that work for them based on how they